Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Records Management in Teams with RecordPoint, second of our four-part webinar series, The Complete Team Story. Thank you for taking time out and being here today. My name is Leslie Anjan, Principal Consultant with Prometics. Joining me today will be Paul Kelly, Head of Sales Engineering from RecordPoint. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will bring them up during the presentation and also we will have time at the end. And if you miss anything today, please contact us directly and we will be glad to assist. Today's webinar is going to focus on the records management aspect of Teams artifacts to cater for modern information management challenges. We look at intelligent cloud approach powered by cognitive and AI, and live demonstration of how managing records can be very seamless to your end users. Prometics is proud of the breadth of our partnerships, none more than our Microsoft Gold partnership. We work with our state, federal, and private customers, helping them get the most from their Microsoft investment by enabling them to more easily use and share information as individuals and in teams. Prometics works across 5 key verticals, taking our customers through the entirety of the digital transformation and its ongoing management. This webinar series focuses on the first of our verticals, digital workplace and collaboration. But a true upgrade to your modern workplace, your team's environment would need to draw on expertise from all verticals. Without further delays, I'd like to invite our next presenter, Paul Kelly. Paul, take it away.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. And Leslie, if you can just make me a presenter, that'd be great.
I have.
There we go. That should be my screen up now, hopefully. Great. Hi, everyone. Really appreciate everyone's time today and the Prometics team for having me along to represent the RecordPoint team. So today, as Leslie said, we're going to take you through a little bit of a showcase of firstly who we are and what we do here at RecordPoint, how we are helping organizations solve some of the many information challenges that they face in 2022, with obviously a focus on the new Microsoft Teams ecosystem that we are finding ourselves living in these days. And then finally, we will finish with a live demonstration of the Records 365 platform, which will give you an idea of how we can manage Teams content in place in a compliant fashion without any impact on the end user. So before we get into the really fun stuff, a little bit of just an overview of who we are here at RecordPoint for anyone that may be new to us. We are a long-standing industry-leading compliance vendor here in Australia. We were founded back in 2009. And since then, we have spread across the globe with offices now in the US, Canada, and the UK, where we not only have teams supporting customers in those regions, we also operate and host our Records 365 cloud compliance platform in each of those regions as well. That allows us to provide not only a highly performant, low latency solution in each of these regions, but it also ensures that we meet the various data sovereignty and data residency requirements for all of the customers that we work with. One of the big reasons why we spread globally, starting with the US, was our very strong partnership with Microsoft that's been in place since 2009. We are not only a Microsoft Gold partner, but we were a charter member of their Content Services Partner Program as well, one of the first partners of that type in Australia, as well as the other regions that we work within. And one of the big differentiators that you're going to see through today's presentation that we offer here at RecordPoint is not only SaaS-based cloud services that make it easy for everyone, but a lot of that being underpinned by our machine learning auto classification capabilities that allow you to really implement transparent, in-place, zero-touch records management, data management capabilities, while ensuring the end users can stay productive, collaborative, and take full advantage of tools like the Microsoft 365 Modern Workplace. Records 365 itself is compliant with all the major global standards. So that is not only standards like ISO 16175 and 15489, but also helps organizations meet a range of other compliance and cybersecurity standards as well, things like GDPR and CCPA, the Australian Privacy Act, and then really localized regional standards like VERS here in Victoria, where I'm based, which is a government mandate for all Victorian agencies. And then finally, while everything you're going to see today is really focused on intelligence and automation and making that records management journey easy, a big part of what we do here is focused around security and trust. And we are attested to be certified against SOC 2 Type 2, as well as the IRAP assessment, which was completed in December, independently to the level of protected here for Australia as well. So really important for a lot of our customers, particularly those in the public sector space that we predominantly play in. So with that, let's move on to the main topic for today, which is the information management challenges that organizations are facing. And in 2022, there are a lot of information and data management challenges, but the key ones that we tend to see here at RecordPoint really gravitate around the amount of data that organizations have to control these days and the velocity in which that data is growing and where that data resides. We now have more data than we've ever had before, sitting across more systems than we've ever had to contemplate before. That old world legacy ECM approach is very much a thing of the past, and now data is decentralized, it is targeted, curated, and designed to meet discrete business workloads with specific audiences around the organization. And because of that, our traditional sort of records team, governance team, the people that have a mandate to manage the information, they no longer have that single view, nor do they have a single set of controls that allow them to appraise, classify, and monitor that content through its life cycle in a way that is compliant with your data and records management requirements. We also have a greater minefield of regulations and standards to navigate these days. We not only have the typical data preservation standards, so things that sort of mandate record needs to be kept for 7 years and then it can be destroyed, but we also have data privacy standards. So here in Australia, the Australian Privacy Act, very much determining sort of what data you hold, the sensitivity of that data, right to be forgotten for consumer data, and then globally, regulations like GDPR and CCPA, IPEDA in Canada, all really important. And while it isn't necessarily tied directly to the records management outcomes, they are linked because records management is about understanding what content you have and how it should be managed. And the only way to meet a lot of those data privacy standards is to have that index, have that knowledge of all of the data that we have stored on our systems, how to find it and how to action it against those policies. Now, finally, and most importantly, all of these challenges can be solved, but in retrospect, a lot of the time, it's just a burden that's placed on the end users. We need to classify data. We need to put data in the right system. We need to have nomenclature standards. All of this was just basically forced upon the end user with most of the time a hope and a prayer. And that led to poor adoption of these systems and users finding other workarounds. So for us here at RecordPoint, what is key is not only helping you solve these challenges, but not simply making it the end user's problem. We want to solve all of these problems while ensuring the end users can be as productive, as collaborative, and successful as possible using the systems and tools that you've designated for them. Now, taking a more visual look at that, the world that we've come from is very much that ring-fenced ECM world, which was nice and easy for the records team. The users, the data, the records, the content, it was all within this one system. That system was typically integrated with the Office suite and Outlook, and it was a nice closed system that put compliance at the forefront. The two problems with this approach is firstly, compliance was at the forefront. So things like productivity, collaboration, accessibility, mobility, all of those things were secondary. And a lot of the time that led to poor adoption, poor usability, and poor uptake of those systems. The other problem it presented for organizations is it almost gave you an excuse to ignore everything else. Now, if we take a legacy ECM tool like a Trim, an Objective, an OpenText, I won't point the finger at any one of them. I've come from that world, have a lot of respect for that world, but in a lot of instances, the minute you had one of those systems, the rule was generally, if it's not in that system, it's not my remit, it's not my problem, or I don't have the ability to do anything with it. And that led to a lot of unmanaged content being spread out across file shares and ERPs and CRM tools. Now, moving to today, the problems are similar, they're just framed a little differently. And content services is a term that I'm sure a lot of people on the line have heard Microsoft reference. Generally, we look at content services as all of the online, SaaS-based, cloud collaboration, document management type tools that are out there. These are services that allow you to create, share content. A lot of the time, there's some interoperability between them as well. Now, the difference between these tools and those legacy ECMs is firstly, they weren't necessarily designed with records management in mind. They were designed for the end user. They were designed to promote productivity and to be collaborative, and most importantly, to be SaaS-based, online, and always accessible. That then led to a completely different method of how we actually create and access that information. So unlike that old school ECM where we'd go into an office and we'd sit down at the desk and we'd log in and we'd open up the ECM and that's where we'd spend our day, now we create and access information through a multitude of devices. In addition, the users are just generally a little bit more technically savvy these days. They've got more expectations, they've got more demands around being able to work quickly and productively with each other. They want to be able to communicate in real time. They want to be able to access content from anywhere at any time. And so that's led to greater demands on the IT teams to provide those types of services. Now, all of that, great outcome for the organization, smarter tooling, mobility, accessibility, happier users, more productive users. But if we go back to the records management team, generally they're seeing this view and going, it's all a bit chaotic. I've got more systems, more users, more processes, more ways that data is being created, and I have no single way to solve that problem until now. So with Records 365, we provide you with a single pane of glass view where we can see all of the information spread across these systems. We can identify it, appraise it, monitor through its entire life cycle, and importantly, we do all of that without the end user being interrupted or impacted in any way. And for most of our customers, the end users actually never know that we exist. We're the one vendor out there where the secret to our success is for you to not know about us. Now, before we talk at length about how we do all of that, we are here to talk about Microsoft Teams. And this slide probably comes across as a little bit dramatic. Those that know me, I like to be dramatic with some of these topics. It's not necessarily a records management nightmare, but it's definitely a new construct, a new dimension to how information is being managed. And unlike a lot of other systems that have sort of come and gone over the years, the reason why this is such a huge hurdle for records management teams is Teams, while it appeared years ago, the uptake was almost overnight over the past couple of years. It's really gone from a nice way to communicate and collaborate to effectively the underpinning system that drives all productivity within an organization when it comes to creating and sharing information. Now, for those on the call that aren't familiar with Teams, and I'm going to suggest it's a very, very small number of you, I thought I'd just do a quick, very high-level overview. This isn't supposed to be Teams 101 or anything, so lots of other content out there that you can go and read if you want to know more. But when it comes to records management and information management, the four core things that Teams delivers that we care about, firstly is the groups element, which is where we control who has access to a team, the security associated with that team. There's the file element, really important. Anytime someone publishes a document or adds a document to a chat, that actually ends up in SharePoint. Teams is very much underpinned by other elements of M365, and all of the files elements actually sit in a SharePoint site. There is the mailbox element, so I can actually email a team that actually gets captured as part of the chat service in Azure, and also has to capture files. And then finally, we have the chat element, the element that everyone's most familiar with, which we all use every day. We chat about everything. We chat privately with our peers. We chat collectively as part of our teams or the channels within a team. And more, we're starting to get questions come up from customers. What should we be doing with these chats? In the past, less of an issue, but now a lot of business is being done within these various chat streams, lots of decisions potentially being made. We need to be able to capture that and ensure that that data is preserved and maintained. And even if you go and talk to sort of the industry bodies, this is still a big challenge globally around how we manage those sorts of records. Now, in addition to how teams work, it does present a multitude of different compliance challenges. So firstly, as I mentioned already, just the exponential growth that we experience with teams. And this was very much, while I think it would have got there, the pandemic at the start of 2020 definitely increased the growth of teams considerably. And I believe the stats are always moving, but I believe there's in excess of about 200 million active monthly users on Teams today. So a lot of people, a lot of organizations really leveraging Teams. That's a lot of chats, lots of emails, lots of files going into Teams. And because of that exponential growth, in a lot of organizations we talk to, Teams was adopted by osmosis. It wasn't something that was planned for 6 months and then rolled out gradually with provisioning processes and rules in place about who gets a team and why. March 2020 showed up and everyone moved to Teams. As file shares was too hard, some of the other systems were on-prem, accessibility from home was difficult. Teams solved a lot of problems quickly for organizations. And so now what we're seeing, sort of flash forward 2 years later, is organizations starting to look back and go, okay, we need to get a little bit retroactive with how we're governing this Teams information. Teams, as I mentioned as well, are multidimensional. So if you think about a traditional SharePoint site, while SharePoint sites can do many, many things, what it really boils down to is this is an area where I can store documents. And yes, I can attach metadata and content types and different aggregation structures and things, but their main dimension was document management, file share on steroids. Whereas with Teams, we not only have the files element, we have the conversations element, we have the email element, and we have the ability to publish those different artifacts in different ways. So I don't need to wait for someone to upload a file. They can actually just send a file to the team via email, and that ends up in the file system. I could be chatting with one of my colleagues and attach a file into the chat. That also ends up into the file system. All of these items now appearing in SharePoint. There's no additional metadata. There's no nomenclature standards. There's no content types that we've specifically designed being attached. So that multi-dimensionality really becomes a challenge for the records team to classify this information. That obviously leads to teams being very unstructured. Traditional SharePoint site, you'll go and design it, you'll put it down on paper, you'll have your IA mapping sections, you'll build out your SharePoint site. With a team, you provision a team, you get a SharePoint site. You start putting files in that team, they end up in SharePoint. So a lot of that content just starts appearing. There's no real thought process behind it. Because of that, there's a lot less metadata to work with. Now, tools like SharePoint still have a lot of metadata, and I'll highlight that when we get into the demo, but there's no real enriched metadata that we can use for classification, for identifying what sort of record is this? What should we be doing with this information? Do I need to preserve this for the next 50 years, or can I destroy it tomorrow? Very little metadata is usable in that team space. And then we get to some of the organizational policies. So now we get back to that age-old conundrum of IT versus records. IT want to be able to provision teams, and then they want to be able to deprecate teams. If they see a team hasn't been active for 6 months, it's a very fair assumption that they'll want to deprecate that team. Whereas there may be content in that team that needs to be kept for the next 10 years. Now, the records team, very unlikely to have a real influence in that provisioning and deprecation process. So how do we overcome that IT wants to delete a team and records wants to preserve the information in that team correctly? Well, thankfully here at RecordPoint, we can solve both of those problems simultaneously. That leads to access and accountability. The records team is very unlikely going to have access to provision or deprovision teams, or set any real policy or influence over how those teams are managed. And then finally, if the message hasn't been clear from this point on, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your own organizations, Teams is here to stay. It is the new norm. I turn on my PC in the morning, or I wake it up, Teams is there, Outlook is there. And then it just snowballs from those two systems. You may have even seen some of the announcements over the last week coming from Microsoft around all of the hybrid integrations and technologies that are being incorporated into teams. They see this as the true modern workplace, your window to everything you need in the Microsoft ecosystem. So from my perspective, Teams is only going to become more embedded in our day-to-day working lives. Now, before we talk about how we manage that Teams content, it's probably really helpful for everyone to just take a quick step back and introduce Records 365 a little bit, and then we're going to get into a live demo and show you these things working hand in hand. So with Records 365, you have a fully cloud-based, provisioned, evergreen record solution. There is no dependency on local infrastructure. We provision this thing in a matter of hours for you, all hosted out of Microsoft Azure. All of the security, the monitoring, the patching, everything is done by RecordPoint. It's truly evergreen, and that keeps it completely up to date with all of the content sources that you are managing. We talked about the standards and cybersecurity certifications, but the real basis for what we do here at RecordPoint is to basically provide one system to rule them all, one federated platform that can connect to a variety of different content sources, manage that content in place while ensuring we know what it is, what we need to be doing with it, we monitor it through its entire life cycle, and then provide you all of the capabilities to perform those records management actions: reclassification, legal holds, defensible disposal, searching, reporting, and e-discovery. And we'll go through some of that in the demo. Importantly, the one big takeaway today is it's zero touch for end users. If you don't want end users to know about RecordPoint, you don't need to tell them. There's no disruption to their current processes. If you've been using SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint online for the past 10 years, you can implement Records 365 without any change or any disruption to how you've been using those technologies. It is designed to adapt with your organization. So if you decide to go and implement an Amazon file share, if you decide to incorporate Salesforce as your CRM downstream, we can integrate with those systems and continue to provide that same single method for management. And all of this is underpinned by our machine learning capabilities. That is what we're going to focus on in the demonstration of showing you how we take unstructured, ungoverned Microsoft Teams content and use machine learning to ensure that we know what it is and how it's managed. Now, just quickly for anyone playing along at home, here's a quick list of some of our core features. There's a lot of content on our website, so I won't go through all of these, and I'll share some links to where you can watch other videos and things at the end of the presentation as well. And for anyone that's interested in what we connect to out of the box, so obviously there is the SharePoint and SharePoint Online suites, Exchange Online with a really innovative take on automating email capture and management in place. OneDrive, which is often looked at from a governance perspective, you know, who is using OneDrive, what are they putting in there, and how should it be managed? File shares, probably been rolled out about 80% of our customer base, still a huge problem, but we can manage in place and help you clean up and deprecate the file shares. We have our upcoming Microsoft Teams chat connector, and I'm going to give you a very early look at that today. And then some of our non-Microsoft connectors. And importantly, all of our customers are fully licensed to go and create other bespoke connectors to other systems as well. So fully licensed to use the APIs. So with that, let's jump over and have a very quick look at Records 365 through a live demonstration. Now, I will caveat, this is not an end-to-end. I'd need another 3 or 4 hours to do that. We're going to be solely focusing on Microsoft Teams records in place and the auto classification capabilities. So if you do want to see other connectors, search, discovery, reporting, disposal, all those sorts of capabilities, please feel free to reach out. We can cover that in another session. Let's bring up Records 365. And before we even show you the platform, we're actually going to start with just a quick overview of my Microsoft Teams environment. Now, hopefully everyone's pretty familiar with Microsoft Teams. What I have here are 4 completely different, separate teams dealing with a range of different business functions. So we have a marketing team, HR team, a team about leasing, and then just our Victorian operations team. In each team, we have the ability to capture documents and have conversations, and obviously you can attach all of these other widgets, many of which we can also support. But where we tend to focus is really around all of the documentation that's being captured in a team. So in this marketing team, they've actually kind of done the right thing. They've got a marketing project that's coming up. We open up that folder and we can see there's a whole range of different documents around that project, right? We've got an invoice about a consultant they hired. we've got a project brief, then we've got some project status reports in there, a couple of different formats as well. We jump over into the HR team. We can see we've got some conversations, we've seen some emails coming through, but we've also got all of the files that are being managed. And for this group, and I don't recommend this at home, the HR team has actually decided to use Teams to manage all of the personnel files. So here we actually have an employee file for Fred Stevens. It's got his medical examination, it's got his 100-point ID check. Fred's already put in a compensation claim. We even have the offer letter from when we first hired him. Now, all of this information, you can see nothing is consistent. Even his name is not consistently used. And every one of these documents is different. And while we might want to set up a rule that says, well, we just keep personnel records for the next 100 years, we may actually still want to be able to identify what these records are. Maybe there will be a report in future where we need to see all of the medical examinations from last year. Well, it's a lot easier to do that through classification than hoping people have used the term medical examination in the subject line of the document. We then get into leasing. Again, we've actually had an email sent through with attachments, as well as some more formal lease agreements. And in every one of these folders, we've got some leasing documents. We've also got some ID checks for the tenants. So as you can see, all of these teams being used as designed freely for those teams. They put some documents and some different structures in place, but there's no real consistency across any of them. And then finally, over in our operations group, we've just got a policies folder and a whole range of different policies going into these areas. And look, this is by design from me using folders and things. Some teams will never get to that point. Also from a chat perspective, files may end up in this space with very little control over what they're called, which folder they're going into as well. So right now, if we were to try to start classifying this information, we don't have a lot of metadata at hand. Very difficult to start applying, M365 retention labels here, because labels need to be fairly automated. You need to have an idea of the structure and where they're applying. And unless you just had some very broad blanket rules over teams as a whole, they're not going to get the job done. So now that we've had a look at teams, let's jump over into Records 365. And the first thing we see when we land on the homepage here is just a quick overview of all of the information that we're managing. We can see the breakdown by the different content sources, how the content is structured, and the most commonly applied categories through our file plan and our retention and disposal schedules. All of those schedules are actually centrally managed here in Records 365. So if you're an Australian federal government customer, in the file plan screen, you'd probably see AFTA Express V2. If you're a New South Wales state government agency, you'd actually see exactly what's at the top of my list here. You'd see GA28. And these are going to be your common classifications, as well as tailored business terms that you may have come up internally as well. And so here is our hierarchical structure. And every one of these classifications has not only all of the core classification metadata, what does it refer to, where does it sit within the classification hierarchy, but it also mandates the retention information as well. I'll just zoom in on that quickly for you. So this is where we can see, is this item going to be destroyed, archived, transferred maybe to national archives, or reviewed? What period of time has to pass before that event occurs? And what's the trigger event? And importantly, you can actually have multiple trigger events in here. You can actually even go and search for custom events coming out of any of the content sources that we're connected to. So a lot of flexibility to be able to set up all of these elements so that not only are they highly adaptable, but you don't have to keep duplicating them or modifying them over time. You can simply come in, if there is a tweak to the schedule, make that change, and that will propagate. Now, once we've got the file plan and everything in place, we need to apply it to records. Records are auto-classified using two methods. The first method is metadata-based classification. Metadata-based classification is great when you've got an area like Sharepoint, where it's in a site and then a library, and then there's a content type attached, and there's some custom metadata values, and everyone's kind of following that process fairly consistently. That is where I can set up I'll show you my decision tree, a tree like this fairly easily, where we can ask some really broad questions like, is it in Sharepoint? And then get down to really specific questions like, what's the contract value of the document? And you can see that's cascading down between different sites and libraries, and you can set this up however you like. This is a little bit of a location-based, but we have a lot of customers that use content types as well, or a bit of a hybrid model. Now, the problem with this, as I mentioned, is it's great for SharePoint and really structured environments, but when we're talking about Teams and Exchange and OneDrive, and in particular file shares, very hard for the records team to predictably put this together. And so what we end up with is a lot of records going through the tree and hitting these empty nodes. And when that occurs, Records 365 does not know how to classify based on the metadata alone. And so you can actually see here, we've got a range of questions around different sites and libraries, but even the way teams are provisioned, unless you just said manage everything across all of SharePoint, it's going to be very hard for a records team to come in and add every site name based on the team name every time someone provisions a team, unless you have really strict governance processes in place. So when that node occurs, the outcome we actually get is if we come back to the browser here and we look at the uncategorized, here's all of those Microsoft Teams records. They're in Records 365, they're managed, they're preserved, they're monitored, they're still in place over in the Microsoft Teams. We haven't changed the experience to the end user, but we don't yet know how to classify them. And you can actually see with this view, I've actually tailored a few things. I've actually added in the site name, which happens to be the team name. And I can actually see, was this record created via the Microsoft Teams web app, which is where a lot of the documents come from, or was it actually done by sending an email to a Microsoft team? So you can actually get really specific around even what the originating source of the record was. Now, if we open up one of these, we'll open up the policy attendance document here, which, just as a reminder, right there, sitting over in a team, I can still come in, I can still open this up, I can do whatever I want to it. What we see here is an overview of the record, and importantly, here's all of the SharePoint metadata, including that it's currently in a Microsoft team. We can see all of the URL information, I can see where in the team it's sitting at the moment, I can see the exact name of the document, and a wealth of other metadata that may or may not provide some additional metrics for you to classify against. Now, importantly, because these records are currently uncategorized, the records team now needs to step in and make some decisions about how to classify that content. But we have some customers that have millions of records coming into a system every week. A records team cannot sit in this view and manually come through and say, make it a policy, right? While it's a really quick process, I don't want to have to do this for hundreds of thousands of records a day. There's no records team on planet Earth that has the scalability to do that. So this is where we actually lean on our machine learning capability, where we have trained Records 365 to understand not only your classification, but your data and your records. And so now, when I come into this classification page, what it's showing me is that I've trained Records 365 to understand these 12 classifications and the types of records that are typically assigned to each of these classifications. We even get a sense of how confident Records 365 is at classifying that content. And so now, as the records come in, if the metadata rules are not sufficient, they will automatically be sent to the machine learning module. That will appraise them, and it will provide this suggestion. So here's every one of those records. You can see there's the policy, we've got the lease agreement information, we've got the invoice about the marketing consultant. And even though these are in teams and potentially grouped in various ways, like, you know, my marketing project had a bunch of project documents in it, we don't need to just assume it's a marketing related document. We can actually see exactly how they should be categorized. And I can come in here and I can sort by the suggested categories, right? So the marketing consultant, even though it's in a project folder, we actually know that's an invoice, so it should be classified as an invoice. We know that the 100-point ID check that we did for Fred as part of his personnel file is actually an ID check. We can come down, here's the leasing documents, here's the policy documents, and you can actually see all of them have a really high degree of accuracy. And if you want, you can even come in and do some searching to say, show me everything that is in, let's say, that operations site. So I'm just going to say operations. It's going to filter down. And now I'm just looking at those two policies that are sitting right here in the policy team. And I can see they're both suggested as policies, 90% accuracy or 90% confidence. Now I can just go, I love it, accept it, classify those records, and I can move on with my day. And the goal of all of this is, as you train the machine learning model, as it gets more accurate, you can actually toggle on these auto apply features. And when that toggle gets changed to on, Any record that comes through and is classified and meets one of these categories that is on, it will automatically classify it for you. And at that stage, the records team doesn't even need to come in here and accept or correct the suggestions. It can just automatically appraise and classify that content. And importantly, every one of those records will get reappraised every time it's edited or moved or the metadata changed. We're constantly monitoring that. All while the end user is sitting in teams, creating, sharing, co-authoring, doing all of their work, none the wiser to the records management process. And so now that I've accepted all of those, if we come back to the core browser, you'll start to see policy attendance is now assigned as a policy. It's due for review in 1 day. So all of the retention information will be populated. And not only that, we will track all of the versions. We will track every audit event that occurs across the record. And because the IT team is eventually going to want to go and do something like delete the team, these records are preserved here as a binary state as well. So they can go and deprecate that team, and this record will be maintained in Record 365 until such a time as it is eligible to be defensively, legally destroyed by the organization. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on before we go to a bit of Q&A is all of this really comes full circle when we can start to search for this information. So I can actually perform some searches, and I've actually saved a couple here really easily, where first I can just go and look for every record that's in any Microsoft team that we have across the entire environment. So you can actually see there's the site name coming up, and I can curate this experience. Let's get rid of the previous action. Maybe I don't care when it was created. I know it's coming from SharePoint, but now maybe I want something like the author, right? I want to know which application, being Teams, authored this. So now I have all of this information and I can start to whittle that down. I can also go and sort by the team aggregations as well. So the search I'm doing here is actually looking at the parent folder. So we can actually see here's operations, here's lease management, here's marketing, here's the anti-smoking program. And if I open up one of these folders, so this is the folder for General Operations Victoria, I can actually see the parent-child relationship that mirrors exactly what's in the Microsoft team. So there's those two documents. And so if the IT team deleted that team today, these will be due for review tomorrow. Nothing stopping the IT team doing their job today, nothing stopping the records team doing their job and their diligence tomorrow or 6 months from now, 12 years from now, whatever it might be. So all of that is indexed, it's immutable, and it is preserved in the record system here in Records 365, while allowing your users and your administrators to deliver the best experience via those content source applications. Now, before we just jump back to Q&A, I just wanted to quickly highlight a couple of online tools for you. So firstly, the RecordPoint knowledge base at the top there, great source for just everything we do and how we do it. We then have the Trust Portal. So for anyone that's interested more in our SOC 2 Type 2, our IRAP attestations, or just generally how the service operates, that's a great place. If there's any InfoSec people on the call, that's generally where you want to start. And then finally, if people just want to see and hear more about what we do, we have our on-demand video library with a series of coffee chats where we actually have detailed videos that focus purely on machine learning, purely on Microsoft Teams, purely on physical records management, little sort of 30 to 40 minute vignettes. So feel free to jump to that as well and have a look, all available via those links there. So with that, Leslie, happy to throw back to you and see if we've got any questions.
Yes, I have, Paul. One of the questions that just got asked is, on top of RMS, do you also look at DMS-related workflows in SharePoint as part of RecordPoint?
Yeah, so Krista, great question. Something that comes up fairly frequently, especially when we're working with partners like Prometics that do a lot of work on the automation front using Power Apps or even a third party like a Nintex. So firstly, we don't interrupt any of those front-end workflows. So if you want to create a publishing workflow, if you want to have a workflow that generates a PDF and sends it to another system, etc., firstly, we don't get in the way. Secondly, if those workflows are changing any attributes of the items, we are ingesting and indexing all of that information. So we can actually see when a record is, say, draft, and then when it's approved, and then when it's published. And we can actually set up rules that say, well, when it's published, change the classification, change the retention schedule, because now maybe that's got an archival value. From a Records 365 perspective, we do have some inbuilt workflows as well, but those are records management related workflows. So things like disposal management and approvals, loan requesting, legal hold related workflows, which are all actually specifically designed and curated 100% in Records 365. And that also means that it doesn't matter if you're using something like Sharepoint that's got all of those features, or a file share that has none of them, we still can curate those records management workflows for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. I have another question here. We have already implemented out-of-the-box Office 365 records management capabilities. What is the easiest way to adapt to RecordPoint? Is there an amount of rework required?
Yeah, so the easiest way is plug us in and get started. Not to sound really cliche in saying that, but the beauty of Records 365 is we don't have any we don't have any content types that need to be deployed. We don't have any web apps or anything like that that need to be sourced. Much earlier on-prem versions of the service, there were workflows and event receivers and things. We don't have any of that. We just monitor the M365 changelog. So as part of our standard implementation, which is typically under 90 days, very minimal amount of effort, we can connect into your existing environment. We can target your SharePoint sites, your mailboxes, your OneDrives that you want. You don't have to go, for every site that's ever existed. And then we bring that existing content in automatically, and then automatically start managing anything that's modified or new content that is added after that. And then from there, there's no impact on the end user, and the records team can fine tune and curate that process of classification over whatever time horizon makes most sense for them.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. The third question is, does RecordPoint support information governance, such as setting up sensitivity labels?
We actually ingest the sensitivity labels, so that's a nice, easy one. So, we always find that there's the best solutions, the customers that are most successful with these practices, they find that balance across both systems. So things like a sensitivity label, so let's say you want to be able to apply something that is, it's unprotected, it's protected, it's secret, it's top secret, etc. You can go and use the sensitivity labels for exactly that, which is what they are designed for. You can obviously automate that in different ways. We ingest that information. That actually shows up in Records 365 as what we call a compliance tag. That's the graph internal field name. When that's ingested, that can be used for search, reporting. It can also influence the classification. So, best way to answer that question is if you're using sensitivity labels, that's great. If you're thinking about using sensitivity labels, but still might want a solution like ours, that absolutely does not get in the way of that thought process. Feel free to proceed with sensitivity labels, and then we can just see how we can best utilize and maximize that data once we're implemented.
Perfect. The fourth question here is, does RecordPoint support any processes relating to data cleanup or analysis?
Great question, and probably a webinar early. So we actually have some new tooling that's just coming to market this quarter. You'll actually see a lot of announcements starting to come out probably later this month into May around our file analysis capabilities, as well as our ROT rules, our ROT engine. So what this actually allows organizations to do is go and look at something like a legacy file share, or maybe some SharePoint sites or teams that have been abandoned, that maybe have low value content, may contain PII or PCI information, and we'll actually generate metrics around that information for you pre-flight. So this is before it comes into Records 365. We'll provide all of the reporting and tooling so that you can then make decisions as to what you want to manage, what you potentially want to delete or destroy defensively, and then from there you can both clean up and continue managing that storage location. In addition, our ROT rules that are going to be hitting the content pipeline of Records 365 very soon are something you can tailor to basically say, if something is a certain format or under a certain size limit, we class it as ROT. We don't want to ingest it. We don't want to manage it. Just ignore it. So lots of different capabilities coming to market at the moment. The National Australia Bank is actually utilising this live in their production systems across petabytes of data. They've been the best preview customer we could ask for, and now all of that will be available to every other customer very soon.
Thanks, Paul. The final question is, how long does it typically take to implement Records 365?
Look, our goal is always 90 days or under. Now that comes with some caveats depending on customer size, scope, if there's things like a migration in scope. But generally speaking, because we're SaaS, because there's no reliance on infrastructure internally, because we're fairly turnkey, so there isn't design work and customization work and in testing all of that. Generally speaking, we can get customers up and running in between 60 and 90 days. And the only thing that tends to influence that significantly is the customer's own appetite to move faster or slower through that process, which we always accommodate. The only other thing to then consider is, do you have custom content sources? I've seen Sean's just added a question now around, managing systems like Content Manager. So you may decide you want to set up a connector for Content Manager, Sean, or you may want to just migrate out of Content Manager. So both of those elements would have a bearing on the scope and the velocity of any project we implement. That's something we do a lot of, though. We have many migrations on play. We're actually got a trim and an objective and an open text going simultaneously at the moment. And we can also talk about integration opportunities as well.
Perfect. It looks like we covered all the questions for today. Paul, is there anything else you wanted to cover up before we wrap up?
No, look, just again, thank you everyone for your time. I believe you'll probably get a recording of the session. And if you do have any other questions or would like, a more tailored presentation to go in a lot more detail, please feel free to reach out to me. It's paul.kelly@recordpoint.com. And I think my information's on the GoToWebinar and the LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out. But other than that, really appreciate everyone's time and thank you for Pro Medic's having us along as part 2 of this amazing 4-part series. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure being with you today, and we will see you in our 3rd webinar in the series, supporting people-centric records management of teams and other Office 365 artifacts. Have a great Easter break. Thank you.